Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the Genshin Impact 5.6 Phase 1 banner review, where we'll be talking about the banner with Escoffier and the Navia rerun, and Aoife, Ororon, and Layla. So let's just get right into it, starting with Escoffier. I'm recording this banner review a little bit later than usual, because honestly, I outright forgot. But that means that I actually have a bit of testing on Escoffier under my belt now, so I can give you some more elaborated thoughts on her after a bit of testing. Escoffier is a pretty strong character. With the leaks for the upcoming new mode that requires 3 teams, and 3 teams where you don't start with high energy, if you care about any sort of like completionist stuff, and you want to do the highest difficulty of that mode. We don't know yet if it's going to have any actual rewards. Right now it's placeholder 100 Mora for rewards, so we don't know what it's going to be, if there's going to be rewards at all for the highest difficulty. But I assume it'll probably be some sort of relatively low impact but useful reward, like a crown or an elixir. The sort of stuff that, like, honestly, if you don't get it, it doesn't really change much for your account, but if you do get it, you feel nice about it. Anyways, Escoffier has multiple aspects of her kit that make her very good for the new mode. One, she enables very powerful freeze teams, and one of the nice things about freeze teams is that they don't use Bennett, they don't use Chevreuse, they don't use Eon-san, and they're not reliant on any specific supports other than Farina. Which means you have a bit of flexibility in terms of how you want to build them, which allows you to play pretty much any cryo or hydro carry in a team with Escoffier, and pretty much all the support resources you have to give to that team is Farina. You'll need to give them another character, but you can choose which one you want from that. And when there are 3 teams you need to make instead of 2, having the ability to effectively build a team from just expending your Farina with pretty much any carry and any whatever support through Escoffier is going to make it a lot more easy for you to be able to have 3 teams that don't use any overlapping units. And then on top of that, because Escoffier's damage is pretty much all from her skill, she's not reliant on her burst, and the fact that you don't start with energy in the new mode means that units that are burst reliant get a little bit more scuffed. Units like Bennett or Eon-san that can afford to build a lot of ER and can end up getting their burst just through precise funneling of particles at the start of a rotation from 0, don't suffer too much. But units that get punished for building a lot of ER, so take Gaming, for example. Gaming is a carry, so if you build ER, you're getting less offensive stats. That means that if you don't start with your burst, Gaming gets gutted. Same thing for a character like Xiao. Escoffier isn't really affected by this that much. Technically, you won't have Farina's burst, because it takes a while to build up, because Farina's particle generation is over time. But missing Farina's burst for 1 rotation is not a complete destruction of your team DPS. And a lot of the freeze carries aren't that burst reliant, and if they are burst reliant, they're pretty easy to funnel particles into, like Ayaka, where you can just decide to funnel your Shenhe particles into Ayaka and your Escoffier particles into Ayaka on the first rotation, and you kind of just get your burst. And so the Escoffier teams really get to avoid a lot of the annoying features of the new mode, where you start with no energy and you need 3 teams. And so, because of that, when it comes to the new mode specifically, Escoffier is an incredibly valuable unit to have on an account. Outside of the new mode, how good is she? She's still pretty good, actually. When you look at the different Hydro and Cryo carries and you look at their teams and how they compare to one another, right now, I would say that every single Hydro and Cryo carry's best team uses Escoffier. And yes, I am including Molani. That's not the case for like high investment Molani, but after a decent amount of testing with Freeze Molani, at my level of investment, which is free-to-play weapon, okay build, he's like 110-8 in talents or something. My build isn't particularly great, and I'm on free-to-play weapons, but at my level of investment, I've had much more consistent clears with the freeze teams, and the speed of my fastest clear with freeze versus vape was honestly not all that different. So, like, if I was forced to play Molani and I had to choose my team, honestly, I'd probably lean towards Freeze. For Neuvillette, I'd say if you've got some cons on him or stuff that effectively increases his personal damage, the Escoffier teams aren't necessarily as good, but at least at C0 or 0, the Escoffier teams are better in DPS, but also so much more comfortable to play and so much easier to play, which is saying something, because Neuvillette teams are already pretty easy to play. And then for pretty much every other Hydro and Cryo carry, Child, best team is Escoffier. International, goodbye. Ganyu, probably, yeah. I mean, it's still Escoffier. Yeah, it's still Escoffier. Clearly Escoffier, because obviously there's just great synergy there. Escoffier, Escoffier, Escoffier. Clearly Escoffier. Honestly, in terms of supports, Escoffier is the strongest character they've released in a long time. And I am starting to wonder if Bennett still is the best support in the game anymore. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that Escoffier took his throne. The problem is her banner is so dog shit. In the Shilonen Asks a Jeff I recorded a couple weeks ago, I talked about my relatively negative outlook on the position of generic supports in Genshin's future, because they keep making stronger and stronger specific supports, and the gap is becoming big between whether you have them or not. And it's making it so that the value of those generic supports like Shilonen is kind of going down with time and is being taken by the very strong specific supports. And Escoffier is the strongest case for this so far. If you are planning on playing any cryo carry or most of the hydro carries, Escoffier is a very good character that you should probably consider getting. One small warning about this though is that if they keep up this trend, it's possible they keep making even more broken characters. One of the biggest issues with blatant power creep in gacha games is that if units keep getting stronger and stronger, a unit released this year will be worthless a year from now. And so depending on the pace of power creep they keep up, Escoffier might not be a character that is all that powerful a year from now, 2 years from now. And at the end of the day, you really are at the mercy of Hoyo and their decisions when it comes to character design. And you can try to predict it all you want, but at the end of the day, they want to make money, so they'll just decide on whatever they think is gonna make them the most money by finding a middle ground between making you feel like you have to pull, but also making you feel like your pull isn't wasted because it will get power crept in a month. All that being said, Escoffier is a character that's like fairly powerful. I'd say that if you're a relatively new account, grabbing yourself an Escoffier from this banner is gonna make your team building in the medium term so much easier, because honestly, you just need to slap random hydro and cryo characters and your Escoffier team is at least gonna be fine. But Escoffier is not the only character on the banner, so who else is there? There is Navia. How good is Navia? Yeah, she's alright. But yeah, recently I've started thinking about carries by categorizing them based on whether they pass certain DPS thresholds. And I think the most important one is the Hyper Bloom check. If a character's strongest team at C0 or 0 stuff is weaker than double Hydro Hyper Bloom, in my eyes, they're not worth considering for meta purposes, and the only real reason you should get them is because you like their character or their playstyle, and you should accept that they're probably not going to feel that strong. Past the Hyper Bloom check, there's the Neuvillette check, and the Neuvillette check is because no character in the game has quality of life as good as Neuvillette. If a character doesn't do more damage than Neuvillette in their best team, then you can consider them for meta purposes, but they're going to be alternatives to Neuvillette or a second side or something like that. Navia passes the Hyper Bloom check but does not pass the Neuvillette, which puts her in a position where if you care about meta, Navia can be worth a consideration, but she won't be the best choice you have. There are a few carries that pass the Neuvillette check. Nowadays, we have Verissa. You could make the argument for Ayaka, but honestly, that's not Ayaka passing the Neuvillette check, that's Escoffier passing the Neuvillette check with pretty much any carry. Arlecchino is like... she's teetering on the Neuvillette check. Obviously, Malika passes the Neuvillette check. Gaming when things go right, passes the Navia check. Perfectly played Linny, but let's be real, that's not happening. And then a few of the characters if you put them with Bennett, Maui, Gussie, Lully, but that's fake as f. Anyways, point being, there's a few carries that pass the Navia check nowadays. So if all you care about is meta, and all you care about is getting an alternative, or a second team, or a third team, you can consider Navia, but she's probably not going to be your strongest option. Do you want to wait until one of the strongest options is on banner? Well, if you don't, or if you don't like those strongest options, then you can consider Navia, and she'll be a fairly strong character. The main deciding factor on whether you go for her or not should probably be how much you like her gameplay and or her character. One nice argument in favor of Navia is that her voice lines are really fun to repeat out loud. Attack! This one's got your name on it! Anyways, let's get into the 4 stars. First, let's talk about Aoife, because he's new. Aoife's main purpose is to be a taser driver, and so the question is how he compares to Sucrose. In terms of the output he has, and how his reactions line up, all that, he's pretty similar to Sucrose, if not a downgrade. But he's a healer, which means that you gain the ability to use Farina instead of Xingqiu or on top of Xingqiu or whatever, but you get Farina's buff on the rest of your team, which actually is relevant. The problem is that his healing at C0 isn't that high, so your fanfare average isn't going to be the best anyways. His constellations, the one that increases his talent level on the skill, helps his healing. His C6 helps his healing a lot. His C6 makes him shoot more often, and because his healing happens when you shoot, it's a pretty big upgrade to his healing. It's still okay healing without the cons, and you'll still get okay fanfare, but not a lot. Here's the thing though, Taser isn't what it used to be. Back in the old days, Taser was a team that had slightly lower ceiling than other teams, but in exchange for that slightly lower ceiling, had a decent amount of utility. Your Taser teams often had some form of damage reduction, and Electro Charge as a reaction is incredibly helpful at keeping you alive because it staggers enemies so much. The thing is, even back then, the utility was an important part of what made Taser powerful, and just in terms of DPS, it wasn't that amazing. With the power creep that's happened and the pretty massive increases to Abyss HP pools, things have not been looking too hot for Taser lately. Taser has gotten a few options that increase its DPS. The transformative reaction buff, well, there was one in 1.6 that increases EM scaling. There was also one recently that increases electrocharge base damage by 67%. But honestly, a good portion of Taser's team DPS has always been the motion value of the characters. Ororon was a nice little upgrade to the Taser teams, but it wasn't that big of an upgrade. Ororon is not Shuttlers. He's a good option in Taser teams, but he's not that powerful. All in all, honestly, Taser teams are just kind of whatever. And that makes it so that a character that is a minor upgrade to some Taser teams, like Aoife, is just honestly pretty worthless. The fact that he's an Anemo Natlan character means that if you want to give Cinder City to an Anemo carry, you gotta choose between him and Chaska, and he can wear TTDS because he's a Catalyst. But the problem is that when you look at the currently available Anemo carries and you look at their teams, he doesn't have anyone he can replace. If you use him as a support that you just swap into once, and then you swap out, he doesn't heal. So you can't use him as your healer with Farina plus Farazan. He's not giving you as big of a buff as Farina is, especially when you count Farina's damage. And he's sure as f not competing with Farazan. Which means that you kind of just don't really have a use for him in those teams. On top of that, he's got an annoying, just like Chaska, skill animation. If you want to proc his stuff, you gotta use his skill and then fall back down. So he doesn't even have a quick animation. All in all, honestly, just not that much going for him. Next, Ororon. I've already talked a bit about Ororon because you kind of have to when you talk about Taser teams. In Taser teams, Ororon is pretty good, but like I said, Taser teams aren't that strong to begin with. And because of that, Ororon's main use right now is not in Taser teams, despite his kit being pretty heavily centered around Taser. His main use is actually Chiller's teams, because he's an Electro character and he's an Atlan character. And that allows him to be a character that applies off-field Electro for Pyro carries, that fulfills Chevreus's team requirements, and that gives you Cinder City, while having a little bit of personal damage. Because of that, he's alright in some Chevreus teams. Here's the problem. If he's the only Natlan character on your team, so if you're carry is not from Natlan and you're not using Yansan, in those overload teams, Ororon literally doesn't have a way to enter Night Soul. His condition to entering Night Soul's Blessing is when nearby characters take electrocharge reaction damage, which won't happen in Chivalrous teams unless you're fighting a Tulpa, or Night Soul aligned damage dealt by other nearby characters, which if he's the only Natlan character in your team, he doesn't get. The thing is, entering Night Soul's Blessing isn't just the way that he can use his Ascension 1 stacks to do damage, it's also the base condition to activate the good part of the 4-piece effect from Cinder City. As a reminder, Cinder City doesn't buff by 40% if you're from Natlan, it buffs by 40% if you're in Night Soul's Blessing. So if Ororon can't enter Night Soul's Blessing, this shit ain't doing anything for him. You're only gonna get the 12% that you could get on any character. Because of that, even in those Chivalrous teams, he's not even a particularly versatile option. And you only end up really using him either if you're also using Yansan or if your carry is Moika. You can also use him with Chaska, and he's okay there, but he's kind of getting worse in Chaska teams with time, not because he's actually getting worse, but because we're getting more and more options for Chaska's teams. And finally, we have Layla, who's also a character that's like kind of hard to evaluate, because she's okay, but she's just not great. Layla is a character that is designed around being a shielder that does a little bit of personal damage, but that little bit of personal damage is just way too low in the landscape of characters in 2025, which means that unless you're playing an old-ass dogshit carry, sorry, Wander Remains, her damage is pretty insignificant, and just as a defensive option, she doesn't really give a buff, so pretty much all she's doing is shielding. Her C4 gives the equivalent of a Shenhe Quill, but the thing is, it is not very powerful. This is small, and you don't get a lot of them. So basically, Layla's only purpose is to be a defensive utility option. That's gonna be somewhat helpful in some teams, right? Because of Escoffier, you now have strong incentives to play Cryo or Hydro carries in teams that only have Cryo and Hydro characters. So if you are lacking in options for shielders, you can consider Layla if you want a shielder on your team. But that's pretty much it. All in all, she's a pretty weak character that is usable. Next, we can talk about the weapon banner. Escoffier's Sig is pretty powerful. Support weapons in general tend to be pretty good, but on top of that, Escoffier is a character that has personal damage, which means that this isn't even just a support weapon, it's also a pretty good damage weapon. Weapon power creep is real. Very quickly, okay, let's compare Symphonist of Sense with Staff of Homa. The average carry generally hovers around 12k base HP. With Homa, you get 20% from the Homa. Let's say you get about 20% HP from your substats. If you're not an HP scaler, you don't really want to build HP, so you're not going to go out of your way to get more. Your Flower gives you 4780. Let's say you get one more roll of flat HP. So your total HP is going to be at around 22k, which means that with Homa, you're getting 0.8% of that as attack, around 174. Symphonist of Sense, in the very worst case scenario, gives you 12% attack. The average carry generally hovers around 300 base attack. With the 608 from the weapon, you'll have 908, and 12% of that is 110. That means that the worst case scenario of Symphonist of Sense is pretty much just only 65 attack behind Homa. But if you're using it on an off-field character, it's just outright better than Homa, even if you get literally no value from the healing or from the like support portion of this effect. What that means is that for carries, Symphonist of Sense is just barely worse than Homa, and for off-fielders that deal damage, it's better, and for healers, it's significantly better. From what I've looked at, it seems like Symphonist of Sense tends to be relatively equal to early constellations or signatures on most carries for your team DPS. So you can think about Symphonist of Sense as another early vertical investment thing to consider on any team that uses Escoffier, but also on teams that use Chivalrous or Iansan. Overall, it's definitely one of the stronger weapons, but honestly, Escoffier is strong enough without this, so it's not like you need it at all. Verdict, it's 20% attack and then 36 skill damage for Navia only. The thing is, compared to the amount of stats you get on newer weapons, this is pretty dog shit. Like, it's not awful, but take Malika's Sig, for example. It gives you 20 crit damage and 28% attack generically. And this is already not that far behind Verdict. on a character that benefits from this. All in all, Verdict is like it's the sort of weapon that I think nowadays isn't really all that worth considering. It is currently Navia's best in slot, but honestly, I feel like it's not even gonna stay her best in slot for long. But yeah, it does have more aura though, that's true. And then the 4-star weapons, they're okay. Dollhand's Assistant is the only HP sword right now, so for Nilo it's okay, but meh. It's also fine for like Goofy, but meh. Drill is okay, but it's not even that much better than your other options. Portable Power Saw, kind of dog shit. Range Gauge is fine, but also not a particularly big upgrade. And then Witsith is a pretty good weapon, but you probably have an R5 Witsith already. All in all, I would say that this weapon banner is, if you want Navia, because Symphonist of Sense is still going to be an okay weapon for Shanling if you use Shanling in Navia's teams. You're not too unhappy losing your 50-50 to this, even if you don't have Escoffier. And then obviously also, you can use this on Chevalers and on Yansan, which are fairly generic characters. Or, not generic, but which are used with a lot of carries. So, it's pretty nice to get. If you're considering getting Escoffier's signature, Verdict isn't a great second weapon to be on the banner. In terms of just passive, this is not a good generic passive. The only generic part of this is 20 attack percent, and 20 attack percent is pretty bad for a generic passive. But if you don't have a single 5-star Claymore, it is at least a 5-star stat stick, so it'll probably be okay to have. I'd say that it's probably about an average weapon banner because the 4 stars, there's no favs. And then when it comes to the character banner, for the Navia one is pretty bad because there's no characters that work all that well with Navia on the banner itself, and none of the characters are particularly strong. It's not a great Escoffier banner, but Escoffier is good enough that you can kind of just safe and go for it anyways. So I'd say that it's below average for the Navia banner and above average for the Escoffier banner. So that's it for the banner review. As usual, I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned anything or two. Yeah, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.